Church, we are quickly approaching our church anniversary, so I want to challenge our church. I want to begin a series entitled Church 101, Rediscovering the Love for Your Local Church. And today I want to raise a series of questions during this series. So today I want to invite your attention to a familiar passage of Scripture, Matthew chapter 16. Matthew 16, verse 13. When you have that scripture, signify by saying amen. Amen. I solicit your prayers today. Matthew 16, 13 reads, Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, Who do people say the Son of Man is? And they said, Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah, one of the prophets. He said to them, But who do you say that I am? Simon Peter replied, You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. I want to talk about, with the Lord's help in your prayers, what's so important about the church. What's so important about the church? Beloved, David Helm, Dean of Southwestern Seminary, was preaching on one evening. I had the privilege of listening to him in Dallas, Texas, and this is what he said, church, that arrested my attention. He said, the church is plan A, there is no plan B. What a strong and confident declaration. He says that the church is God's only plan to save and redeem humanity. That is such a strong word, because we live in a society where often people have made the church the elective instead of the core of their existence. The researchers say the church is in a drastic decline. They are staggering 1,500 churches closes their doors on a monthly basis. Some would say, does the church even count? We have generations, especially millennials, who will say, I have a God consciousness, but I'm not being bothered with organized religion. Some of us have been faced with the cold indifference from our families. Many of us feel uncomfortable bringing up the God subject or the church subject with our families. And oftentimes the church's failures and faults have been played out on the stage of culture. And oftentimes people look at the church as a joke because we have had gross misappropriation of funds and misconduct that has happened for everybody to see. So the question that looms over us today, is the church important? Should people take time out of their schedule and be committed to church? After all, philanthropic organizations are on the rise. When we see all of the work that the Red Cross is doing, we'll say maybe the church is not doing much. Maybe should we even waste our time with church? It seems like they have hijacked the literal and the moral currency of the church. After all, the United College Fund supports many of our HBCUs, and it looks like the church doesn't have any currency to contribute to the greater good of humanity, especially the black church. But I come on assignment to tell you, before you write off the black church, take a look at history. It was the black church before Morehouse became the prestigious and grand institution it was. It was housed in the basement of the Friendship Baptist Church of Atlanta, Georgia. Right across the bridge, Arkansas Baptist College didn't have its own, but it was birthed in the Mount Zion Baptist Church. Before you write off the church still has power. And I agree with David Helm this morning. The church is indeed God's plan A. There is no plan B as it relates to the transforming of souls and society. Listen, when we have the church in its rightful place, our homes will be better. And when our homes are better, our communities improve. And when our communities improve, our cities are better. And when our cities are better, our region becomes stronger. And once our region becomes stronger, our nation can get back on the right track. And once our nation can get back on the right track, the world can turn its face to God when we who are in the church accept and respect the power of the church. Sometimes we're afraid. We start doubting. We start wavering in our commitment of what the church really means. But I'm here to talk to the believers today. If you don't stand for the church, nobody else will. Here in our text, Jesus is in the region of Caesarea Philippi. While Jesus is in the region of Caesarea Philippi, he's quite withdrawn. He's looking for some peace and tranquility. While he's in Caesarea Philippi, he has this looming reality. There's a proverbial clock that is above his head because he knows that his life and ministry is coming to an end. But when his life and ministry comes to an end, something greater is going to be birthed. Oh, that's what I like about when we are in harmony with God. Our life has a much farther reach than the immediate. But Jesus has this pressing concern that's on his heart, and this is the concern: do people really understand his person and his mission? And I think that's a worthy question. That's a plausible question, because after all, nobody simply wants to just exist. No one really just wants to live life. We should all hope and pray that our lives has some level of existential reach. That simply means that we ought to want our lives to have purpose and impact beyond our lifespan. That's what I came to tell somebody this morning. You know that your life has purpose, that even when you moved off the scene, that your life is still making an impact in somebody else's life and in the world. And on the heels of this concern for Jesus, we see the church being birthed. We are privy to be in Matthew 16, to be in the birthing room of the church. And this is the relevant question I had this morning. In the midst of all that's going on, the midst of the rise of philanthropic organizations and black Greek letter organizations, does the church have a place? What is it that distinguishes the church from any other well-intentioned organization? What is it that distinguishes the church from any other well-intentioned organization? This is the first thing I want to give you. This is the reason why the church is important, is founded upon spiritual acknowledgement. Look, Jesus, the text opens, Jesus is retreating to the non-Jewish territory of Caesarea Philippi. Jesus settles in, and his disciples are now sitting down and settled, and he has their undivided attention. And Jesus says, I have a question for you, boys, and this is my question. What is the public opinion of me? He says, what are the polls saying about me? And imagine the disciples conversing. They began to have their own conclave, and they start saying, some say you are a prophet. Others say you are Jeremiah. There's another group that says you are Elijah. You are the superior prophet, because the Jews believe once Elijah died, he would come back in the afterlife. Others say you're John the Baptist, because John the Baptist was a famous preacher. They came with all of the public opinion polls saying who they thought Jesus was. And then Jesus shifts from the public's opinion and he asked them a more pressing and personal question. He says, but I got another question. Who do you say that I am? And that's the question before us, just not the disciples then, but us 21st century disciples. Who is Jesus to you? We have to take note where Jesus raises this question. They are in Caesarea Philippi. He says, I want to know who you say I am. Caesarea Philippi is a place where all the Greek gods made their debut in people worship. Caesarea Philippi was where this great marble white temple that was built, that the people was preoccupied with this beauty, that it was erected by Herod the Great. In Caesarea Philippi, there were 13 Syrian Baal worship temples, and Jesus asked the question to the disciples of who do you say that I am, in the midst of pagan worship, in the midst of people being preoccupied with the material. Jesus says, I'm standing in contrast to everything that's going on, and I want to see, am I a priority to you? And that's the word to us this morning. There's a lot going on in our society, and Jesus wants to know, where is my place in your life? Oh, church, we live in a world where everybody has a perspective of Jesus. The atheist says he's non-existent. The unchurched says he's unimportant. The scientist says he's an anomaly. He's the eighth wonder of the world. The philosopher says he's a great thinker. The intellect says he's something that you can't quite put in a box. The Muslims say he's just a good man. The U.S. government said we'll put his name on our money, but we won't believe in his ethic. But this is the issue. Everybody has a perspective, but they can still miss the point. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor. Everybody can have a perspective, but they can still miss the point. But look at Mr. Peter. Peter stands up and says, I have an answer for who Jesus is. He says, you are the Christ. You are the anointed one. You are the one who has all power. There is nobody like you. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And that's what makes the church different than any other organization. Every Sunday we come to church and say Jesus is the main attraction. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, Jesus is the main attraction. And this is the word. Everybody else may get it wrong, but you make sure you get it right. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, society may get Jesus wrong, but it's our job to get it right. And if nobody else knows who Jesus is, you ought to know, and you ought to know for yourself. He's Jesus, Mary's baby, Anne's grandson, Elizabeth's cousin, Ezekiel's wheel, Job's war horse, the fourth man in the fiery furnace, lily of the valley, bright and morning star, supernatural in power, superlative in wisdom, a coming king. Jesus is the main attraction. And that's why we come to church.
Because it's not founded on anything else except who Jesus is. And that's what I came to tell you. Every now and then, when you can't say nothing else, you just ought to call his name. Even when stuff ain't right in the church, if you call his name, it'll get back in order. Something else I want to give you, and I'm done. It's founded upon spiritual acknowledgement, but is built upon the strongest foundation. Peter makes his confession of who Jesus is, and Jesus says, you are Peter. You are a rock. Can I tell you something? When you are on the right side of Jesus, you will always be strong, and even when you're weak, you'll become stronger. I don't have nothing deep to tell you. You just have to be on the right side of Jesus. He says, you are Peter. And then he says, and upon this rock, I build my church. What is this rock that Jesus, is it Peter? No. Can't be Peter. Peter makes a strong confession. He affirms and commends Peter, but he can't build his church on Peter because Peter, at times, he's strong, but then he's weak. Because when you read verse 23, you keep on reading the text, when Jesus says he has to be crucified, Peter says, Lord, be it far from me. And Jesus realized that Satan had hitched a ride in Peter's mind, and he says, get thee behind me, Satan. Jesus says, upon your confession, but he says, upon this rock. Peter, you are a piece of a rock, but this rock that I'm going to build my church on is not a piece of a rock, but it's a large, it's a boulder. And let me tell you, I'm glad that Jesus doesn't build his church on mere mortals. I'm glad that Christ does not build his church on people, because this is the word, we mess up sometimes. Oh, that's a word for somebody today. Your attendance and your commitment to church ought not be based on anything or anybody. No. There are times where the pastor get it wrong, but Jesus still gets it right. There'll be times when the church leadership will fail, but Jesus will never fail you. There'll be times when the people that you think should be here won't be here. But the fact of the matter is, Christ is always here. And this is the word for us from math. Jesus is the constant. Everything else may be a variable. And the word today is live on Jesus. It says, I build my church. And then he says this, and the gates of hell shall not prevail. I wish I had time to deal with these gates, but it simply means this: opposition will show up in the church. There'll be times where the church will be at war with the atheists, the antagonists, but sometimes we are victims of our own apathy. Sometimes the church's greatest opposition is us that's on the inside. I know we don't want to talk about that, but those of us who say, giving honor to God, who's the head of my life, sometimes the greatest opposition is what we fail to do. But Jesus says, y'all be of good cheer. He says, you'll have opposition, but the opposition won't have the last word. And I don't know about you, that shouts me in the midst of a world where there's churches closing, and sometimes it looks like the church is on the losing side. The good news is the church will prevail. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, the church will prevail because it's built on Christ. That's why we sing the old song, on Christ, the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. I'm done today. But finally, the church operates with significant authority.
Listen, Jesus is talking to Peter, but he's not building the church on Peter. Speaks to Peter, he says, I'm not building my church on you, but you will be a future foreman for the church. Because I'm going to put you down to preach the sermon on Pentecost. He says, but I want to give you some encouragement and some responsibility. He says this, and I'm giving you the keys. He says, the keys. Whoever has keys, that's who has authority. Whoever has the keys to your house controls who comes in and who gets out. Jesus says, Peter, I know you're not perfect, but I have an assignment for you. I know the church don't have it all together, but I still have work for them to do. And then he says, whatever you bound on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Literally, this is a rabbinical term that literally means whatever you say that is forbidden in the earth will be forbidden in heaven. Whatever you permit on the earth will be permitted in heaven. This is the word. God does not build his church on mere mortals, but God builds up his church with mere mortals. You missed it. He says, my foundation of my church is not on you, but I want you to help accomplish my work. And that's a word to the church. Whatever the church is going to be, you got the power. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, whatever our church is going to be, it's up to us because we have the authority. And sometimes we're always looking for the pastor to be our spiritual authority, but we believe in the priesthood of all believers. You first got to be a shepherd in your house. And when you shepherd your house, the church becomes stronger and stronger. I thank God for the church. The church is God's enterprise operated by humans. You know, this is the thing. Us humans, we mess up sometimes, but it's still the church. So we are not perfect. We let God down. But this is my testimony. I've met some good people at church. I've met some of the best people I know at church. I met a lady by the name of Angie Hope who taught me how to read in church. It was a woman by the name of Vera Williams who taught me what it was to serve as an usher in church. Learned how to sing in the junior choir by a lady by the name of Marilyn Hunter in church. Met my wife in church. Met my best friend at church. Been able to shake Jesse Jackson's hand in church. Met celebrities in church. But let me tell you, the most important person I met is Jesus Christ. And when I met Jesus, oh, there was a burning. Oh, such a burning. Deep down within, he walks with me and he talks with me. Since Jesus came into my heart, floods of joy on my soul, like a sea billows roll. Since Jesus, look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, I think the most important person is Jesus. If anybody should ever write my life story, for whatever reason there may be, just look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, Jesus is the best thing that ever happened to me.